A powerful millionaire in New York forced his spoiled, headstrong daughter to marry a complete stranger, a humble farmer from Texas. No one could have imagined that this very marriage would change her life forever. She had no idea that life out there would slowly transform the way she saw everything, every breath, every heartbeat. Before we begin the story, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Let's dive into the story together. Isabella Whitmore. In Manhattan, her name was almost synonymous with luxury and scandal. The only daughter of real estate mogul William Whitmore, Isabella had grown up swaddled in silk and power. Limits. That word didn't exist in her world. She spent money like it was oxygen, changed boyfriends as often as she changed handbags. Her words could cut. Her gaze dismissed people before they even spoke. To her, life was a runway, and everyone else was just background noise. William had had enough. One crisp Monday morning, he called her into his office. No small talk, no smile. A thick manila envelope sat on the polished oak desk between them. "I'm preparing to hand over the company," he said, eyes fixed on hers. "But if you want to inherit anything from me, you'll need to meet one condition." Isabella raised an eyebrow, smirking. "A condition? Are you serious?" William finally looked up, his voice as calm as it was final. "You will marry a man named Jacob Miller. He's a farmer, lives in Texas. You'll live with him for 1 year." Silence. Thick and suffocating. Isabella blinked, then burst out laughing. "You're trying to marry me off to a farmer? You do remember who I am, right?" William didn't flinch. "Exactly. That's why I'm doing it." His tone never rose, but every word struck like a hammer. "You've lost control. You have no sense of what anything truly means. You'll marry Jacob and live his life, or you'll get nothing." She sank into the leather chair, stunned. Her world, for once, wasn't bending to her will. Her father's eyes were clear, unmoving, unforgiving. No more arguments, just humiliation, fury, and a bitter silence where a decision was made. The heat in Texas hit different. It wasn't just the sun. It was the silence, the vast land stretching endlessly, and the absence of anything that glittered. Isabella Whitmore stepped out of the black SUV in heels wholly unsuited for dirt roads. Her lips curled slightly in distaste as she stared at the modest farmhouse before her. So this was the man her father had chosen. This was her sentence. Jacob Miller stood by the fence, arms crossed, boots worn, shirt sleeves rolled up over sun-darkened forearms. His face was rugged, sunburned, solid, like someone who didn't waste time on appearances. And when their eyes met, something unspoken crackled between them. Isabella smirked first. "So, you're Jacob," she said, voice coated in sarcasm. "I pictured something less rural." Jacob didn't flinch. "And I pictured someone who knew how to say hello without sneering." Her smirk deepened. "You'll find I'm full of surprises." He glanced down at her designer heels, stuck in the gravel. "So I see." They were alone, but the space between them was thick with disdain. Neither one made a move to shake hands. Neither one smiled. Inside the small farmhouse, the justice of the peace stood ready. No flowers, no music, no witnesses, other than a dusty window and a half-asleep cat in the corner. The ceremony was short, brutal in its simplicity. When asked about exchanging rings, Jacob shook his head. "We won't be needing those," he said flatly. Isabella let out a dry laugh. "No, of course not. It should have ended there. A name on paper, a deal sealed." But just as they turned to leave, Jacob's voice broke through the silence again, low and steady. "I remember you," he said. Isabella stopped. Her back stiffened. Jacob continued. 3 years ago, a charity gala at the Met. You yelled at a waiter for bringing the wrong drink, loud enough for the entire room to hear. She slowly turned to face him. "You were wearing a red gown and cruelty like perfume," he added. "That night, I thought you were the kind of person who'd never change." Isabella's lips parted slightly. She wasn't used to being seen, much less remembered, for something ugly. He didn't look smug. He looked honest. Brutally honest. And for the first time in a long time, Isabella Whitmore was speechless. The gravel crunched under her heels as Isabella stepped out of the truck and into a world that might as well have been another planet. The farmhouse stood crookedly at the edge of the field, its paint peeling, the screen door hanging on one hinge. Chickens clucked somewhere nearby. The air smelled of earth, manure, and wind. There were no polished floors, no elevators, no echo of city traffic, just open sky and silence. She stared ahead, arms folded across her chest, lips pursed. "So, this is it?" she muttered. Jacob dropped her suitcase by the porch, not bothering to look back. "This is it." He walked ahead, his boots stirring the dust with every step. She didn't follow immediately. Her instinct was to turn around, climb back in the truck, and make a call that would end this nonsense before sunset. But she didn't. Not yet. Inside, the house was clean but plain. Worn wood floors, a battered kitchen table, a single fan spinning overhead. Her room was barely larger than her closet back home. No vanity, no mirrors, just a bed, a dresser, and a window that opened to nothing but sky and trees. Later that evening, as she settled in with her arms crossed and mood soured, Jacob knocked once and leaned against the doorframe. "Wake-up calls at 6. We've got stalls to clean." She looked up like he had just asked her to scrub a sewer in a ball gown. "Excuse me?" Jacob shrugged. "Everyone works here, no exceptions." Isabella blinked slowly. "I am Isabella Whitmore. I do not clean stalls." Jacob's expression didn't change. "Out here, your last name's just noise." She scoffed. "This isn't work for someone like me." He nodded once. "Exactly why you're here." The next morning, the rooster crowed before dawn. Isabella stayed in bed, the sheets tangled around her, arms clamped over her ears. Jacob knocked once, then pushed the door open. "It's past 6. "Do you not own a clock?" she snapped without lifting her head. "I don't need one. The animals don't wait for anyone." She groaned. "You really expect me to get up and shovel? Whatever you people shovel?" "I expect you to try. I expect you to be delusional," she muttered. He walked away. By noon, she was still in her room, but hunger eventually dragged her out. In the kitchen, she found a single sandwich on the table. Peanut butter on plain white bread. No fancy lunch spread. No fresh squeezed juice. She stared at it like it was poison. "Better eat," Jacob said from behind her. "Dinner's in 6 hours." She picked up the sandwich with 2 fingers, like it might bite back. By day 3, the standoff had settled into routine. Jacob gave instructions. Isabella ignored them. He said, "Muck the stalls." She said, "Not happening." He handed her gloves. She tossed them in the sink. He watched, stone-faced. But he never raised his voice, never argued. And somehow that made it worse. Each day the quiet around the house grew heavier. Jacob worked from sunup to sundown. Isabella sulked, drifted from porch to kitchen, and tried calling friends, none of whom picked up. She opened her laptop. No Wi-Fi. Her phone? Spotty at best. She was isolated, trapped, and slowly, undeniably, disarmed. By the end of the week, even Isabella knew. Running wasn't an option. The only way out was through. And that realization terrified her more than the dirt on her designer shoes. That night, the farmhouse was quiet. No traffic, no buzzing phones, no late-night city lights outside her window. Just the creaking of old wood and the hum of crickets in the distance. Isabella lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, her body sore in ways she never thought possible. Her hands, once manicured to perfection, were raw and slightly blistered. Her back ached from carrying feed buckets she barely knew how to hold. But her thoughts were louder than the pain. She reached for the small leather notebook tucked under her pillow. She hadn't written in it since her last ski trip to Aspen, a page full of names, outfits, and mindless complaints. But tonight, the words came differently. April 2nd. I had to wake up at 6 a.m. to clean out a horse stall. The smell was unbearable. My arms hurt. My back is killing me. And yet, my heart feels lighter than it ever did in Manhattan. She paused, then underlined the last sentence, twice. The next morning, she didn't wait for Jacob to knock. She didn't smile, didn't announce anything, but she got up. She dressed in the only pair of jeans that didn't still smell like new leather, tied her hair back into a rough ponytail, and stepped into the early morning light with a bucket in one hand and silent resolve in the other. She worked beside Tom, the wiry old hand who moved like he was still 20. His laugh came easily, even while lugging 50-pound feed sacks. "Tell me something, Tom," Isabella muttered between breaths. "Why do you smile so much? This can't be your idea of a good time." Tom looked at her, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve. "Well, Miss Isabella," he said, voice gravelly but warm, "when you believe what you do matters, the work don't feel like punishment. Feels like purpose." Isabella didn't respond right away. But something about that word, purpose, stuck with her long after the chores were done. Later that day, while she helped stack firewood near the porch, Ruth came by with her usual quiet strength and a basket of fresh cornbread. Ruth was the kind of woman time couldn't quite wear down. Her hands were worn, her eyes kind, and her voice always carried a touch of gentle truth. "You're not quite as miserable as you were last week," Ruth said with a chuckle. Isabella raised an eyebrow, but she didn't argue. Ruth set the basket down, then touched her arm lightly. "Let me tell you something, dear. Life's not about how much you own. It's about what you give, and who you become in the process." Isabella looked at her then. Really looked at her. The woman had no jewels, no silk blouses, no designer shoes, but she had a presence that felt richer than any room Isabella had ever walked into. That night, in her journal, Isabella wrote again, "I don't understand them. Tom, Ruth, even Jacob, they work themselves to the bone, and yet they smile. It's not fake, it's not for show, it's like they've figured something out that I haven't, and for the first time in my life, I want to understand." She closed the journal gently and placed it on the nightstand. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, and for the first time, Isabella didn't feel like the world was closing in. She felt like maybe, just maybe, it was opening up. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. A pale ribbon of light stretched across the horizon, brushing the edges of the barn with soft gold. The morning air was crisp, scented with dew and hay, and Isabella was sweeping the porch, not because someone told her to, not because she had something to prove, but simply because it felt right. The broom felt awkward in her hands. Her strokes were uneven. Dust flew into her face more than off the boards. But she didn't stop. From the edge of the pasture, Jacob paused mid-stride. He didn't call out, didn't smile, just watched, quietly. His expression unreadable, but something in his eyes had changed. He wasn't looking at a spoiled heiress anymore. He was watching a person, trying. Later that morning, Isabella appeared in the kitchen before Ruth arrived. She didn't announce anything, just tied on an apron, backwards at first, then turned it around with a little huff and started slicing vegetables. It was clumsy. She cut them unevenly, dropped a bowl, cursed under her breath, but she stayed. Ruth entered moments later, raising her eyebrows with amused surprise. "You're early," she said gently. Isabella didn't look up. "Don't get used to it," but her voice lacked the usual bite. When breakfast was served, Tom took a bite of the scrambled eggs and chuckled. "Bit more pepper next time," he said kindly. "I'll remember," Isabella muttered, cheeks warm. But there was no shame in it, only something new, unfamiliar. Humility. By noon, she was in the stable, shovel in hand. She stared at the mess inside the stall like it had personally offended her. And yet, she stepped in. The first scoop was tentative, the second, firmer. Her arms burned. Her shoes, once pure white, were now a lost cause. But as she glanced over at the curious cow blinking at her from behind the gate, Isabella laughed. A real laugh. Small, breathy, but genuine. It startled her. She looked around, hoping no one had heard, but someone had. Jacob stood a few feet away, leaning against the post. He didn't say anything, just watched, the corners of his mouth tugging up slightly. "Don't get any ideas," she said, brushing hair out of her face with the back of her arm. He nodded, still not speaking. And then, for the first time since she'd arrived, he left without reminding her what to do next. Because, for the first time, she didn't need to be told. That night, Isabella sat at the small wooden desk in her room. The lamp cast a soft halo of light over the journal now worn at the edges. She opened to a blank page. April 6th. I woke up before the sun, not because I had to, because I wanted to. I made eggs, I shoveled actual animal poop, and I laughed. I forgot what my voice sounded like when it wasn't trying to impress or insult someone. I'm still not sure who I'm becoming here. But maybe I like her. She paused, then added, Jacob saw me. He didn't say anything, but it felt like he did. She closed the journal and turned off the lamp. Outside, the stars hung heavy above the fields, and so it started with a smell, faint at first, smoky, sharp. Then the crackle. Jacob was already on his feet before the first flicker of orange lit the sky. From the window of the farmhouse, flames rose like angry ghosts over the barn. "Fire!" he shouted, sprinting barefoot across the yard. The animals inside. He didn't hesitate. Isabella stood at the front door, frozen. The heat hit her face. Her lungs tightened with panic. Jacob's silhouette disappeared into the smoke. Someone screamed. A dog barked wildly. The night, once silent, had turned violent. And then, something shifted. She ran. Barefoot. No plan, just instinct. Inside the barn, the world was chaos. Flames danced on rafters, splintering wood groaned above. Jacob was pulling open stall doors, shouting the names of animals like they were family. "Go! Move!" The cows, panicked, shoved past him into the open night. Sparks rained down like stars turned cruel. Then he saw her, Isabella. Face smeared with ash, eyes wide. She was tugging at a latch, trying to free the smallest calf, its leg tangled in the broken fence beam. Her hands, raw and trembling, worked without grace, but with pure determination. "I got it!" she shouted, coughing. Jacob reached her side just as the beam gave way. The calf stumbled out, and Isabella, barely standing, threw her arms around its neck, guiding it toward the exit. They collapsed outside just as the roof behind them groaned and caved. Ash coated her hair. Blood trickled from her palm. Her nightgown was torn at the hem. Jacob dropped beside her, chest heaving, eyes scanning her like he couldn't believe what he'd seen. "You," he said, breathless, voice caught between awe and disbelief. "You actually saved it." She looked up, and for the first time, there was no defiance in her eyes, no sarcasm, no mask, just quiet wonder. "I didn't think I would," she whispered. "I surprised myself too." They sat in silence, watching the barn smolder. The calf nuzzled her leg. In that moment, under the shadow of ruin and the weight of smoke, something unspoken passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of something else. Something real. It was late morning. The sky was clean, soft blue. Isabella was crouched by the trough, sleeves rolled up, hands deep in cold water, scrubbing algae from the stone edges. The work wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. But these days, she didn't think twice about doing it. The sound of tires crunching gravel broke the quiet. A sleek, black Mercedes pulled up near the barn. Its shiny curves were wildly out of place next to the weathered fences and rusted tools. The door opened, and a familiar heel clicked against dirt. "Isabella?" That voice, sharp, polished, unmistakably New York, cut through the air like perfume in a barn. Jessica, her oldest friend, shopping partner, gossip confidant, a remnant of the life Isabella had once ruled. Jessica stood in full designer armor, sunglasses too large, lips too red, jacket too white. Isabella wiped her hands on her jeans and stood up slowly. Jessica looked her up and down, eyes wide with thinly veiled horror. "Is this a joke?" she said, gesturing around. "Tell me you're filming a documentary or something." Isabella tilted her head, calm. "It's not a joke," Jessica scoffed. "You're seriously living here? With animals? Manual labor? I mean, what even is this?" She took a half step back, as if the trough might splash her Louboutins. Isabella looked down at her hands. The skin was dry, nails chipped, but they didn't bother her anymore. "It's my life now," she said simply. Jessica blinked. "You used to wear silk robes and drink champagne at brunch. Now you're elbow-deep in cow water. What happened to you?" A pause. Then Isabella smiled. It was soft, but unshakable. "You knew the old me, Jess, but you don't know who I've become." Jessica stared at her, stunned by the ease in her voice. "You've really changed," she said, almost whispering. Isabella nodded. "Yeah, I have." Jessica gave a small, awkward laugh, then reached into her purse and pulled out a gold invitation. "There's a gala in Manhattan next week. The usual crowd. Everyone will be there. You should come. Just to remind yourself who you are." Isabella took the card, glanced at it, then folded it in half. "I think I already know." Jessica frowned, then shrugged. "Well, good luck with the cows." She turned back to her car, her heels leaving no mark on the dirt road. The door slammed shut, and the engine purred as the car pulled away, growing smaller in the dust. Isabella stayed there for a long moment, the folded invitation still in her hand. Then she dropped it in the trough and returned to scrubbing, her expression serene. Behind her, Jacob watched from the barn, arms crossed. He said nothing, but in his eyes, there was respect. And something else, maybe pride. The sun had barely risen when the black sedan rumbled up the dirt road. Dust billowed behind it like a warning. The farmhouse, still quiet with early morning chores, seemed to pause as the car came to a stop. William Whitmore stepped out. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, pristine as ever, his shoes gleaming, utterly out of place among the mud-streaked boots and work-worn hands of the farm. His eyes scanned the land with a look that was neither wonder nor appreciation. Only judgment. He had not come to admire. Isabella was in the yard, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled to her elbows, clipboard in hand. She was reviewing a rebuild plan with the team, simple sketches she'd worked on late into the night by candlelight. Her palms were calloused now, her voice steady, her presence respected. She didn't notice him at first. But when she did, her body went still, then upright. She handed the clipboard to Ruth beside her and wiped the dust from her hands as she approached. No smile, no hesitation. William looked her up and down, his expression unreadable. His eyes lingered on the dirt on her boots, the faint ash still clinging to the edges of her sleeves. "So this is what you've chosen," he said at last. His voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet like glass. "You've traded our name for this." Isabella didn't flinch. She met his stare with one of her own. Not rebellious, not defiant, but resolute. "I didn't trade anything," she said softly. "I found something that was never in our world." William's jaw tightened. He took a slow step closer. "You are not the woman I raised, not the Whitmore I expected you to become." Isabella's gaze didn't drop. "No," she replied, her voice calm and certain. "I'm not. Because I was never allowed to be anything but your projection of success. Not a person, just an heir, a pawn." Silence swelled between them. Behind her, the workers continued moving lumber. A child's laughter echoed faintly from the barn. Life went on, with or without his approval. William stepped back. His shoulders stiffened, his lips thinned. "If you walk away now, there's no coming back. No inheritance, no Whitmore legacy. You'll have nothing but this dirt and the small dreams of small people." Isabella's heart thudded, not with fear, but with clarity. She looked around, at the rebuilt fence, at Ruth helping a boy fix a broken wheelbarrow, at Jacob in the distance, sleeves rolled, eyes briefly meeting hers with a quiet nod. She turned back to her father. "I used to think having everything meant having control," she said. "But here, I learned something else. That peace doesn't come from power. It comes from purpose, from belonging, from giving." William's expression cracked, just for a moment. Something behind his eyes flickered, but then it vanished. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded envelope, and dropped it at her feet. "Then this is where it ends." He turned, walked back to the car. Didn't look back. The engine started. Gravel crunched beneath the wheels. And then, he was gone. Isabella stood there for a moment, unmoving. The wind tugged gently at her hair, her hands curled at her sides, not in tension but release. She didn't pick up the envelope. Instead, she turned, walked back to the others, picked up a plank of wood, rolled up her sleeves again. There was still work to do, and she had never felt more sure of who she was becoming. The morning after the fire, the air was still thick with the scent of smoke and wet ash. The barn was now a charred skeleton against the golden haze of sunrise. Timbers blackened, roof collapsed, tools lost. For a long moment, everyone stood in silence, mourning what had been. And then Isabella moved. No dramatic declaration, no hesitation. She stepped into the center of the yard, still in the same boots she'd worn through the fire, and unrolled a sheet of paper on the hood of an old truck. It was a rough sketch, shaky lines, smudges, but it was a plan. "We rebuild," she said, not to rally attention, but because it was already happening in her mind. She began assigning tasks. Jacob and Tom would handle the foundation work. Ruth would gather supplies from nearby farms. The younger ones, Lena, Micah, Daniel, could help sort through the debris. They listened. They followed, not because she demanded, but because she led. There was a quiet confidence to her now, the way she wiped dust from her hands before shaking someone else's, the way she leaned down to help lift a beam, not flinching when splinters caught her skin, the way she asked questions, took notes, and adjusted the plan when someone wiser suggested a better way. She wasn't giving orders. She was building trust. And slowly, piece by piece, they began to raise a new barn, Not just in wood and nails, but in something stronger. A shared will. That afternoon, Ruth stood by the edge of the field, watching Isabella tie her hair back with a ragged scarf as she marked measurements along the fence line. The sun caught in her messy braid. Dirt streaked her cheek. Her shirt was damp with sweat, but her eyes were alive. "You know," Ruth said gently, "when you first came here, you were like a flame, bright, loud, and burning everything around you. But now—" She paused, smiling softly. "Now you're light, still bright, but warm, steady." Isabella looked at her, lips parting as if to respond, but no words came. Just a nod. A slow, grateful nod. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the fields, she stood beside Jacob, surveying the new frame they'd begun to raise. The barn wasn't finished. The work was far from done. But something had shifted. For the first time in her life, Isabella felt like she belonged. Not because someone handed her a title, not because of a last name, but because she'd earned it, with blistered hands, honest sweat, and an open heart. The land no longer felt foreign. The people no longer looked at her with suspicion. And the girl who once scoffed at the idea of waking before noon was now the first to rise, with purpose waiting just outside the door. She was no longer just a guest on someone else's soil. She was home. The wildflowers had grown back stronger after the fire, just as she had. It was a quiet morning on the farm, the kind where dew still clung to the grass and the sun stretched gently over the hills. A soft breeze rustled through the tall wheat, and somewhere in the distance, a songbird called. Everything felt alive, but not rushed. This was the morning Isabella would marry Jacob again. This time, not by contract, but by choice. She stood before the old mirror in Ruth's bedroom, wearing a simple linen dress the color of ivory cream. No designer label, no diamonds. Just a thin braid pinned across her crown like a soft halo, and hands that had known real work and real tenderness. There was a knock. Her father stepped inside. William Whitmore had changed. Not in the sharpness of his suit or the precision of his shoes, but in the way he looked at his daughter. No longer measuring her, no longer correcting her, just seeing her. He cleared his throat, awkward but sincere. "If you'll have me," he said, voice softer than she'd ever heard it, "I'd be honored to walk you down the aisle. This time for love, not leverage." Isabella didn't speak. She just reached out and gently took his arm. The ceremony was held under the old oak tree by the edge of the property, the same one she once cursed for shedding leaves onto her shoes. Now, its branches stretched wide like arms gathering everyone in. Neighbors, farmhands, children with dirt on their cheeks. People who once watched her with judgment now smiled at her like she belonged. Because she did. Jacob waited at the altar. No tux, no tie, just a crisp white shirt rolled at the sleeves and that familiar look in his eyes. Steady, kind, completely undone by the sight of her. When William placed her hand in Jacob's, there were no grand declarations, just a silence so full it almost ached. Jacob spoke first. His voice cracked but never broke. "The first time I married you," he said, "I did it because I gave my word. This time, I'm doing it because my heart never gave me a choice." A quiet laugh trembled through the crowd, followed by tears. Isabella took a breath, her voice clear as glass. "I once said I didn't belong here," she began, pausing to look at the people, the land, the man before her. "But now, there's nowhere else I could belong." The applause was gentle, the kind that wraps around you like a hug. As they kissed beneath the branches, petals floated down, not from decoration, but from the wind playing through the tree. Pure, unexpected, perfect. And for once, Isabella didn't need the world to watch. She only needed this one moment, in this one place, with this one man, who loved her not despite who she was, but because of who she'd become. She had walked into this life by force. She stayed because she had finally found home. The late afternoon light stretched golden across the fields, casting long shadows and soft warmth over everything it touched. The air smelled of earth and early blossoms. It was planting season again. Isabella sat at the wooden table by the window, one that faced the fields where her old life had quietly unraveled, and her new one had taken root. She held a pen, slow and steady in her hand, and the page before her bore the shape of a truth she now fully understood. She wrote, "Dear Father, I once believed happiness was power, control, a seat at the head of every table, but now I know happiness is something else entirely. It's waking up before the sun and hearing the wind move through open fields. It's being held when words fail. It's laughter after a long day of work. It's choosing someone and being chosen in return. And most of all, it's the freedom to become who you truly are." Outside, Jacob stood waiting near the garden beds, hands in his pockets, a bag of seeds at his feet. She joined him. No words, just a smile exchanged like a vow. Together they knelt by the soil, side by side. Her hand cupped the seeds, tiny, ordinary but full of promise, and dropped them gently into the ground. One by one, each seed a memory, a mistake, a lesson, a choice. And above them, the sky shifted into that rarest kind of blue, the kind that only comes after the storm has passed. As they worked, the breeze carried the sound of their laughter across the fields. They had once been strangers, then reluctant partners, then something more. Now they were simply two people, planting a life they had chosen, not one they had been given. In the quiet rhythm of hands meeting soil and hearts moving in sync, the story closed, not with fireworks, but with something deeper, a peace that lingers, a beginning disguised as an ending, and somewhere, just beneath the surface, something beautiful was beginning to bloom. If this story touched your heart in any way, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who still believes people can change. And now, I'd love to hear from you. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate Isabella's transformation? Drop your favorite scene, or your most emotional moment, in the comments below. And if you've ever experienced a turning point like hers, I'm listening. Your story matters here.